Welcome once again to the DraftKings Daily Trot. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Scott Mailwig, Sports 25 to Life, and breaking down tonight's slate, of course, as we do. And interesting options at the top here as far as starting pitchers go. You got Chris Sale, Corey Kluber. You can include Cole Hamels in that also as well. But really, I think the decision tonight comes down between Kluber and Sale. I'm going to take the better matchup with Chris Sale. And, he's looked incredible. They both looked really good recently. But obviously, KC a much tougher matchup than Texas is. And Chris Sale finally looks like the pitcher we all have known and loved recently. He's thrown a lot of pitches, 109 plus in the last 3, 120 in the last one. 7 2/3 or 8 innings in each of his last 4 starts. I think Sale's got to be your top option tonight.
Yeah, I like him quite a bit too. The third guy I'll throw in that group is I think James Shields is a terrific play at 9,400 on DraftKings also against the Mets. Their offense has really been struggling. Shields has been, he's been quality all season for the most part. I think he only has 3 games the whole year under 20 DraftKings points. And even his bad ones have been like 16 points or so. So he's been a great cash game play. His biggest problem so far is just the fact that he hasn't been pitching deep into games. They've been keeping him in that 6-7 range for the most part. And obviously you're not going to complain about 7 ever, but when that's what he's topping out at, it limits the upside a little bit. But I think now that his price has come down under 10,000 again, and a decent discount from a couple of these top guys, I think he's that third guy in that group for me.
Yeah, and it's hard to argue that, obviously. Mets one of the worst in the league against righties. Not a lot of power. His one weakness, outside of not pitching deep, has been home runs, and they don't have a lot of guys that can take him deep either. So I like that call a lot. A couple other guys that are interesting here. Like I mentioned, Cole Hamels. I think he's a fine tournament option. Reds, not so good against lefties. They got a decent amount of power against lefties, but as a whole, not very good. Miguel Gonzalez is a guy who's had really significant home road splits, but he's pitched well in many of his games recently. Gets a Houston team is striking out a lot, and he's shown some strikeout upside. 8 against Seattle, 6 last time against Tampa Bay. I think for $6,400, he's certainly in play tonight as well.
Yeah, as far as favorites go, there's a lot of pick'em type guys on this slate. Shields is the biggest favorite on the slate. Sale and Kluber are up there, but the guy that's surprisingly second on this slate in that category is Eduardo Rodriguez for Boston at only 5,700 on DraftKings. I think he's an interesting both cash game and tournament play at that price. You're almost guaranteed to get what you need out of him for cash games, I would think, at 5,700. He looked pretty good in his first major league start. He wasn't anything like super special, but he's a guy that's been pretty good in the minor leagues. He did go 7 2/3 innings, which is absolutely fantastic for a guy making his first major league start. 7 strikeouts. I'm probably going to have him in probably close to 50% of my lineups today on DraftKings. I'm going to mix and match him a little bit with Shields in cash games, I think. Sale in cash games. And then in GPPs, I'm going to do a lot of the same stuff, but probably spend up more on Kluber and Sale than Shields with him. I think he's just a really, really good play at 5,700 today.
Yeah, I can see that. Another guy around that price tag as well, Lance McCullers at $5,600. He hasn't been pitching deep, but off his first couple starts, he's pitched well. Even a game at Detroit, went 6 innings, just 2 earned. He's allowed 4 total earned runs in his 3 starts. Hasn't made it through the 5th inning. 2 of the 3 is a little bit concerning, but looks like the stuff has been there. He's been pretty good. So if you're going for a cheap play, I don't mind him. Or if you want to continue to target the Angels, who got destroyed last night by Chris Archer, Nate Carnes doesn't look too bad at $6,400 either.
Yeah, absolutely not. That's a really, really solid play, too. There's a lot of cheap pitchers on this slate you can look at a little bit. I like any of those guys. I think Rodriguez is probably the safest one and has the most upside, which is why I'm going him the most. But those other guys can definitely put up good numbers.
Absolutely. As we move over here to catcher, not a ton of options that you love on tonight's slate. Interesting thing, though, to see is some of these, the more pricey guys. Yasmani Grandal, $4,800, going up against Chad Bettis, who had a really good start last time. Obviously, you're not buying into that happening in Coors Field tonight. Still targeting the Dodgers, but at $5K, he's going to be pretty hard to fit in your lineups. Carlos Santana at $4,400, I think it's going to be a really nice tournament play, though.
Yeah, he's finally paying off, me playing him all the time.
Yeah.
It only took 2 months, but it's finally paying off. He's been red hot. He's got 2 home runs in the last week or so, taking a ton of walks. I think he's racked up 8 walks in the last 6 games. He's seeing the ball really well. I'm a big fan of Carlos Santana and that catcher eligibility on DraftKings today.
Derek Norris, another guy I really like, $3,400, gets Dylan G fresh off an injury tonight. So I'm going to be looking that way. And then, as you're looking at cheap guys, once again, Miguel Montero, cheap. Dan Herron, much better against righties than he is against lefties. So Chicago lefties certainly in play. Not an ideal ballpark, but at $3K, if you need a cheap guy hitting righties well and a nice split, I think that Montero's a fine way to go as well.
Yep, 3,600 for Wilson Ramos against a lefty in Burley isn't bad either. I don't mind him as more of a cash game play. I like my Montero probably more as a GPP play of that duo. No one else I'm really loving. I mean, I'll look at AJ Pierzynski again against a decent righty in De La Rosa. That's at Arizona, which is always nice. He's 3,300. Outside of that, I mean, I'm probably sticking to these guys we've already mentioned.
Yeah, I'm with you there. It's not particularly deep tonight at first base, or at catcher. First base next. Of course, Adrian Gonzalez in play, $5,400. You're going to have to pay a pretty price for him, but you're going to want to get yourself some exposure in that matchup. Other options, Anthony Rizzo, another tournament guy, lefty against Dan Herron. Going to be looking that way a little bit. As far as other options, there's not. Albert Pujols is absolutely on fire right now at $4,400. So if you're playing a bunch of tournaments, you almost have to get yourself some exposure there. I think another interesting one, if you're not playing Miguel Gonzalez as your SP2, Chris Carter, we know, has a lot of power. Gonzalez's biggest weakness is giving up the long ball. We know that Chris Carter pretty much strikes out or hits it over the fence. So I like him.
Yeah.
And then Ryan Howard, of course, at $3,800. Mike Leake is terrible against lefties.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of good first basemen at the top here as far as price goes. I mean, Rizzo's in a pretty good spot at 4,700 against Herron. As far as the rest of some of these late game guys go, a cheap guy is Ben Paulsen if he's in the lineup against Bolsinger. Hitting 5th, 6th in the order for Colorado, 3,300 at first base is nice. I don't love going cheap at first base, especially with all these power bats and great matchups. There's another guy, Todd Frazier, who we're probably going to mention at third base here that I think is a great play. Santana, I prefer him at catcher by a long shot today with how weak it is, especially on the late slate. I mean, a couple of catchers in the early slate that are pretty good, but on the late slate here, I mean, it gets tough. I like Ryan Howard also at 3,800. I think that's probably the guy I would go if I was going cheap at all. Like you mentioned, facing a righty in Leake. I mean, he has at least that big power upside that you're looking for, where Paulsen, I mean, he's playing at Coors, which is nice, but he just doesn't have the same kind of upside as Howard and some of these really expensive guys.
Yeah, and I mean, Leake's been getting shelled recently, so I want to get a piece of that. And one more cheap guy I'll throw out it for a tournament, Deandre Alonso, first game back, 3 for 4, gets Dylan Jeeves coming off an injury. That's going to be an interesting play in Petco tonight.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, second base, Howie Kendrick, $4,800. You have to pay a pretty penny for him, but he's certainly in play once again. Coors Field, I mean, it kind of goes without saying, these guys. Another guy I really like, and I hate to say it because he's been so bad. He's been the butt of our jokes on Sundays, but Chase Utley, another lefty against Mike Leake, had his way with Johnny Cueto last night, who's one of the better pitchers in the game against lefties. 2 hits and a home run. Now tonight gets Mike Leake at $3,600. So Chase Utley's going to be a guy that'll find his way into a lot of my lineups tonight.
Yeah, definitely. He's a guy I'm going to be looking at a decent amount. There's not a ton I love at second base here. I'm going to be probably looking for cheap guys. Kepnes is facing a lefty tonight. D. Gordon's facing a lefty tonight. Delino DeShields is facing Sale, even though he's 3,200. I don't feel great about that. A couple other guys that I don't feel great about. I think Martin Prado is probably one of the guys I'll be using against Leicester today a little bit for 3,300. I like that spot in the lineup. He hasn't been great. I've been playing him a decent amount, but he's a guy that's okay in cash games for the most part.
Yeah, and Corey Spangenberg, $2,700 against Dylan G. Not a bad way if you're going to go cheap. And then, of course, Logan Forsythe against the lefty at $3K. All right, third base here. You got some your most expensive option, Josh Donaldson. Had a decent game yesterday, but certainly didn't pay off his price tag despite the tough matchup. I like Nolan Arenado a lot in tournaments. We already mentioned before, people like to pay for Tulo and the other bats in this lineup, but seem to leave him out a lot. He's one of my favorite tournament plays at third base tonight. You already mentioned Todd Frazier. Gets a good lefty in Cole Hamels, but a good lefty who's given up a ton of home runs to right-handed batters this year, 10 already on the season. So Frazier in a pretty good spot there. As you look down a little bit further, if Justin Turner's in the lineup, you can consider him as well. But my favorite play dollar for dollar is probably going to be Evan Longoria at 4K.
Yep. That's who I was going to mention too. We talked about him a couple times last week. Anytime he's against an average to below average lefty, I think he's a fantastic cash game and tournament play.
Yep.
Just a ton of upside there. Wind blowing out to left in that one today makes him a really nice play. I think he's far and away my favorite, like you said, dollar for dollar third base play today.
Absolutely agree. Louis Valbuena, $3,800. Once again, facing a guy who struggled giving up home runs. Valbuena, he's not doing a whole hell of a lot outside of hitting home runs, but he's hitting a lot of home runs, up to 12 now. Only batting 199, but you're not paying for him for his batting average. You're paying for him for his power. And if Don Mattingly will ever stop hating Alex Guerrero, maybe he'll get in the lineup tonight at $3,700. You can consider him, but I don't know. Mattingly hates letting Clayton Kershaw finish out innings, and he hates letting Alex Guerrero and his power get in this lineup. So I don't know. Maybe someone gets his head on straight today and we see him, but I'm not banking on it. Shortstop, as usual, not pretty. If you're paying up for Tulo, I don't blame you there at 5K. Hanley Ramirez against Trevor May, $4,900, certainly a tournament option. I'm not paying $4,700 for Jimmy Rollins. Just not going to happen. I don't care that it's in Coors Field. Alexi Ramirez has been a guy that's been hitting well, stealing some bases at $4,100, but he's kind of pricey. I'm going to try to find value here at shortstop wherever I can.
Yep.
I just don't know where it's going to come from. It's going to have to come from someone getting in a good lineup spot. Ruben Tejada has been batting second most nights now. He does get James Shields, which is tough, but at $2,300, I don't mind punting that if I'm not going with James Shields tonight.
I'll mention a guy I mentioned yesterday who I liked quite a bit and had a decent game. He hit sixth in the order. Jake Elmore is only $2,000 again for Tampa Bay. He's been hitting sixth in the order quite a bit, especially against lefties, which is exactly what happened yesterday. He had a single and 2 RBI yesterday, playing first base and hitting sixth in the order. I'm guessing he's probably going to do the same thing again against the lefty in Santiago today. He's probably going to be locked in for me at either second base or shortstop in a ton of my lineups.
Yeah, that's a great call. I mean, 2K opens up a lot of versatility, especially if you want to pay up the 2 pitchers today. So, as we move to the outfield, Bryce Harper is not your obvious play. Your obvious play is Jock Peterson, $5,100. Home runs in 4 straight games. Maybe he makes it 5 tonight. Maybe he doesn't. Either way, he's going to be so heavily owned that you're going to need to get yourself a piece of him. He's even more pricey than Mike Trout tonight, who is obviously in play, but I mean, for the same reasons he always is. Some other guys, they're going to be nice tournament plays. Giancarlo Stanton, he gets a good lefty in John Lester, but it's still a lefty. He mashes lefties. $4,500, I really like him as well.
Yeah, definitely. One guy that I like quite a bit, actually, is Brantley. Again, even though he's against a lefty, I mean, he's a guy like Votto, who I don't really even consider it, like, a tough matchup, really. Just the fact that it's lefty on lefty. Vargas isn't a great pitcher anyway, and Brantley's just looked great lately. He was a highly owned guy last night, and he wasn't great. I mean, he had a hit and an RBI or whatever, but I really like him again in this one for only $4,800. He's going to be a nice GPP alternative for me to Jock Peterson when he's really heavily owned. It's hard not to like all the Colorado guys. Outside of that, I think I'm going cheap in the outfield today so I can spend up at first base and third base and probably pitcher as much as possible where I can't use some of the cheaper pitcher options that are on the early slate. For the late one, I mean, we're looking at Ryan Rayburn's facing Vargas also. He's been hitting cleanup for only $2,800 against lefties. I mean, that's a great play. Billy Burns is a guy I've been running out there quite a bit. Animal Sanchez isn't a great matchup, but if he's hitting leadoff for $3,300, that's a steal. The other guy I like quite a bit as a cheap play is Will Venable again, facing G. Hitting first in the order most of the time for San Diego. $3,300. I think he's a really solid play, too, for cheap.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, you're going to need to get yourself some cheap bats in order, like you said, to get some Coors exposure and in order to get yourself some of these bigger names on the mound, and you're going to need them because there's not a lot of middle options. Like, you're either going to drop all the way down to a cheap option at pitcher or stay at the top, I think. So,
right.
Like that's about the way you're going to go. And I'll throw out one more guy, Dexter Fowler, $4,400, switch hitter against Dan Heron. He's a guy that can hit for power. He's got some speed. I like him as a tournament play a lot tonight as well.
Yep, I do too.
All right. With that, that's going to wrap things up for us. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to this YouTube channel here. And check out all of our content at dailyfantasycafe.com.